Craig Oliver, who was doing the job for David Cameron until this summer, and Alastair Campbell, of course, famously did the job for Tony Blair. Welcome to you both. And Craig Oliver, the news events of the last few minutes, to a certain extent, crystallising some of the issues that have been out there all year, really, you know, European cooperation, the whole question of migration, the whole question of open borders, and people in our countries feeling very insecure.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, as well as a terrible event, a huge tragedy and something that people are massively and rightly concerned about. And yes, was that a factor in a lot of the considerations that happened in this country in terms of the Brexit vote, but also what happened in America? Absolutely. There's major concern about terrorism around the world. Do
you think it was terrorism and immigration that swung the Brexit vote the way it did?
I think immigration was a big part of it. I think, you know, we've got to be careful not to... I mean, this terrorism thing's going to be with us for a long, long time. And I mean, there was a piece in one of the papers today talking about the fact that it's only a matter of time before something like this happens in Britain again. And I think we just have to accept that.
It's 10 years since...
yeah, which is actually a long time. 7 years since 7/7. You had the Lee Rigby attack here, and then you've had the, if you like, the white supremacist killings as well. But I do think that we're just going to have to get used to this. It's going to be part of our life going forward.
And is it in any sense our fault either for being too open and too liberal or for behaving provocatively? I mean, some people would accuse the Blair administration and the involvement in the Iraq war as being a provocation.
I think you'll be really, really careful. I think that the fact is that there is a real battle going on, and it is going to be brought to our doorsteps, not least because it serves the purposes of those who are bringing that battle. So I think you've got to be really careful not to say, you know, it's his fault, it's her fault. I thought Nigel Farage the other day suggesting that Angela Merkel was responsible for this killing that we've been talking about because of her tolerant, if you like, attitude to immigration and the refugee crisis. I think we've got to be very, very careful. Big, complicated issues, and it's going to require leadership. And my worry at the moment is the sort of leadership we're seeing in the world, particularly following the election of Donald Trump, is not the leadership that's going to actually solve this problem. It might actually exacerbate it.
Well, I mean, what sort of response is required on security and immigration, do you think, now? I mean, clearly things have moved on from when you were in government.
Well, look, I mean, first of all, I think the most important thing to say is that the responsibility of terrorism is with terrorists, and I agree with Alastair on that, and I think that it's very important that the Western world stands up and says, look, we believe in freedom, we believe in freedom of speech, we believe in the rights of people to do these, to be able to speak openly, that kind of thing. And I think it's very important that governments at this time actually stand together, stand shoulder to shoulder and say, look, it's your fault, it's your problems, and that we're not actually getting bogged down in arguments about what's the nature of our country.
What do you think now is the answer on immigration? Because certainly in your party, the Labour Party, there's very active argument between people, a lot of people who would describe themselves as New Labour or Blairites, saying we've got to admit that we've got to have tighter controls, and that being very much resisted by the Jeremy Corbyn wing of the party.
I don't actually see it as a New Labour Corbynite thing. I think it's more, I see this much more as a regional. I think London, so Corbyn, Diane Abbott, John McDonnell, very much saying, look, you know, and rightly, London has hugely benefited from immigration. Other parts of the country, particularly the North and the Midlands, I think, MPs saying, look, you know, we're getting it all the time. Immigration is what made us vote for Brexit, and immigration, if you're not careful, is what will make us not vote for you in the next election. So immigration is part of the argument going on with the Labour Party, but I think, again, it's much more complicated than that. But I think you have to accept people's concerns, I think, without necessarily reaching the wrong policy conclusions. That's what I'm afraid I think we as a country have done with Brexit. I think we've come out of the European Union, we've voted to come out of the European Union, and I mean, Craig and I have argued about this for some time. I actually do think it was a mistake to have the referendum, because referendums often are not about the issue which is on the ballot paper. So all of these angsts and angers that are around the place, they all came flooding out. Some of them are to do with immigration, some of them are to do with Europe, and not all of it.
When you look back at your time working for David Cameron and his defeat in the referendum, where do you think things went wrong? What were the
Well,
mistakes with hindsight?
Well, with hindsight, I think, look, we certainly made mistakes, and I was part of the team that was responsible for that. I think we put all our chips on economic risk, and we believed that, you know, James Carville's idea, you know, it's the economy stupid, that's something that has filtered through to elections and referendums for the last 100 years and has tended to work. We put all our chips on that. And when immigration came to the fore, we didn't really have enough of an answer. We were basically saying to people, this international institution expects us to have unlimited freedom of movement. And when you said that to people, particularly after it emerged that we had net migration of 330,000, they didn't like it, and that was a real problem for us.
Were you also wrong on the economy because things haven't gone over a cliff edge yet?
Well, I think you pay your money and take your choice in terms of how the economy's going. I don't think that the fact that the pound has dropped quite as much as it has is a great thing for this country. I think next year we're going to see prices rising, wages remaining flat. We're probably going to be in a situation where in politics it brings to the fore the idea of people having a cost of living crisis again. And I think as you see those things filtering through, people will have real concerns. And also the rubber hasn't really hit the road yet. We haven't actually even triggered Article 50, let alone left the EU.
OK, you wouldn't have had the referendum, but given that the referendum did take place, what went wrong?
Again, I think complicated, but I think Craig's right that and again we argued about this at the time, that the Project Fear, so-called, I think it had worked to some extent in Scotland. It had worked for the Conservatives in beating Ed Miliband, and they thought they could do it again. And I just think people they're kind of fed up with it. And so the negativity, I think, eventually turned against David Cameron. And actually, even though I think a lot of what he was saying may have been right, he was probably the wrong messenger come the end. And the public were just sort of, as they've done in America, just saying, you know, we want change and we don't care what it is.
But this is really interesting because I think there's so many different points there.
And Labour not getting out there, did that?
For sure. I mean, I do think that there was an ambivalence at best in the Labour leadership. I think the Labour Party as a whole was desperate to fight for Remain, but the Labour leadership was at best half-hearted.
I think it's all very well saying that David Cameron perhaps wasn't the right messenger, and there may be some truth in that. I think the reality was who else was stepping up? Who else in politics was stepping up at that point and doing it? And also this point about whether or not we had to have a referendum, I think it's just denying political reality. You cannot have the UK Independence Party winning the European election.
Just one question. Why didn't we see all the living prime ministers appearing on the same platform saying Remain?
Because Gordon Brown didn't want to do it.
Is that right?
I don't know about that, but I think that possibly. But I do think that also that sense of bringing out all these big guns, that didn't work in the end as well. Whether that was
but I do know. But Adam, I do know the reason for this, and it's a perfectly legitimate view. Gordon Brown was of the view that there was a danger of the establishment putting forward itself, and that what was the ultimate symbol of the establishment would be four prime ministers.
And he also felt the Better Together campaign in Scotland, actually that sort of sense of us all being kind of hand in hand was not a very.
And there was a definite sense of the Labour Party thinking it was toxic to be touched by
Conservatives. So that's something we can blame Gordon Brown for. OK then.
Not the crash, not the crash.
No. This is...
You didn't frankly have the balls to put country before party.